I stood in black heels that were half a size too tight, not because they hurt, but because I wanted something to hurt more than my heart. It was my father's funeral. The man who raised me believed in me when no one else did. I couldn't stop crying, not the soft kind, either. The kind that chokes you, that makes your nose run, that leaves mascara tracks down your cheeks. That's when I heard it. "Look at her," my cousin Trisha whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Those tears are for the money, not the man." Laughter followed. From my Uncle Keith. From my own sister, Madison. I wiped my face, but not for them. For me. Because I refused to let them see how deeply they'd just cut me. They thought grief was weakness. They thought I was easy to break. They didn't know that one day soon, I'd watch their world crumble, and I wouldn't shed a single tear. Have you ever been laughed at while your heart was breaking? Comment where you're watching from, because I know I'm not the only one. My name is Emily Parker, and to understand why my father's funeral wrecked me so deeply and why their laughter cut like a knife, you have to know what my dad meant to me. His name was James Parker. Not Jim. Not Jimmy. Just James. He was the kind of man who shook hands with waiters, called my teachers ma'am and sir, and wore flannel like it was armor. I was his only child from his first marriage. After the divorce, my mom moved out of state and didn't look back. But Dad, he never once made me feel like I was half anything. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, our house was modest, but filled with warmth. Saturday mornings were for cinnamon rolls and records. He was an old soul who swore vinyl sounded better. His favorite was Sam Cooke. I'd twirl around the living room in mismatched socks while he sipped his coffee and smiled at me like I was the center of his little universe. He remarried when I was 10. Her name was Darlene, and with her came two stepkids, Madison and Bradley. From the start, there was a line drawn in that house. I tried to erase it, inviting them into games, sharing my books, even once letting Madison borrow the necklace Mom gave me before she left. It never mattered. I was James' girl, and they were Darlene's kids. Still, Dad made up for the coldness I got from the rest. He taught me how to drive, his knuckles white as I floored the gas on the open back roads. He came to every debate tournament, sat through every 4-hour school play where I had 3 lines. I remember once, in 10th grade, I lost my voice right before the regional finals. I thought I'd have to forfeit, but he stood in the hallway with a thermos of hot honey water and said, "Your voice will come back. And even if it doesn't, I'll be right here. You don't need to win for me to be proud." God, I miss him. When I got my acceptance letter to the University of Wisconsin, he was the first person I called. I was the first Parker to go to college. He told me to frame the letter. Not just to remind myself of what I achieved, but to remind others that I wasn't the quiet one they tried to ignore at family dinners. We didn't talk about money much. But when I graduated and started my own business, a small marketing consultancy, he was my first investor. Not a ton, just enough to get a website and print some cards. But it was everything to me. He believed when no bank would. Meanwhile, Madison became a pharmaceutical rep who traveled mostly to Cancun and back. Bradley worked in insurance, or maybe tech. I honestly never figured out. What I did know was that they rolled their eyes every time Dad brought me up. It became a running joke. Oh, Emily and her little hustle. But Dad never laughed. He once told me quietly after a Christmas dinner, "They laugh because you scare them. You don't need to be saved. They don't know what that's like." I wish I'd recorded that. I'd play it every time I doubted myself. He was getting older, though. Slower. He didn't like to admit it, but I saw the signs. The unsteady hands. The mix-ups with names. Still, he came to my new office opening, small space, nothing fancy but mine. He wore a navy blazer and brought me a plaque that read, "To my daughter Emily, the CEO of her life." I keep it on my desk even now. In the months before his passing, we talked often. I'd swing by with lunch. We'd sit in the backyard and just be. He told me things I think he'd saved for the right time. That he worried about how the family would behave when he was gone. That he didn't want me to be outnumbered. That he had made arrangements, and to trust that he had my back. I didn't fully know what that meant at the time, but I clung to it. What I didn't realize, what no one tells you, is that sometimes the real mourning begins after the burial. When the casseroles stop coming, and the smiles vanish, and the masks come off. Because the same people who hugged me at his wake were already laughing behind my back. And all I could think was, he deserved better. Looking back now, I can see the signs had been there all along. I just didn't want to believe it, because believing it meant accepting something I wasn't ready to face. That my grief didn't matter to them, because I didn't matter to them. It started small. Always does. There was the time we had a family brunch at my dad and Darlene's house, a monthly thing that had started after his second retirement. I had arrived early, helped set the table, even brought Dad's favorite lemon bundt cake from that tiny bakery he loved in downtown Cedar Falls. Madison showed up 45 minutes late, sunglasses still on, complaining about her flight from Denver, though we all knew she'd flown first class. Bradley walked in talking loudly about stock options and residual portfolios, whatever that meant. He nodded at me like I was the catering staff. As I poured coffee for everyone, Madison looked at me and said, "You know, for someone with her own business, you've got a real talent for service work." She laughed like it was a joke. But it wasn't. My dad chuckled softly and said, "She's the only one in this room who built something from scratch." That shut Madison up for exactly 10 seconds. Later, while I was in the kitchen with Darlene, she said in that sing-songy, passive voice of hers, "You know, honey, you've always been so sensitive. That's why the others tease you. You just take things too personally. Too sensitive."
Right.
That label had followed me my whole life, like a second skin I didn't ask for. What stung the most wasn't that they said these things. It's that they did it with such ease. Like hurting me was as natural as breathing. At Thanksgiving that year, Dad had a harder time walking.
He used a cane.
I offered to help him out of the car, but Bradley beat me to it, only to say, loud enough for the front porch to hear, "Gotta stay in the will somehow, right?" I froze. Dad didn't laugh. Neither did I. But everyone else did. Even my Aunt Sandra, who used to sneak me gumdrops at church, chuckled behind her hand like it was all just light-hearted fun. They saw his money as their birthright. They saw my love as manipulation. That winter, I took Dad to his doctor's appointment. He had a mild stroke scare. I stayed overnight in the hospital while the rest of the family sent one-word check-ins by text. Madison sent, "Update." Bradley sent, "Let us know." Not "how is he," not "how are you," just "let us know." Dad noticed too. In the quiet hours when the machines beeped and nurses walked by with clipboards, he whispered, "They've never sat with me like this." I just held his hand and said, "I always will." The next day, I overheard Madison talking on the phone outside his room. She thought I couldn't hear her. "Yeah, Emily's playing the martyr. I swear, she's already imagining the inheritance. It's so fake." I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But that was the moment I felt something begin to harden inside me. Not hate.
Not yet.
Just the cold recognition that I was no longer family to them. I was a threat. A problem. An obstacle between them, and something they thought they deserved. The final straw came a few months before he passed. Dad had organized a small gathering, just family, just dinner. A kind of informal goodbye, though none of us wanted to say it out loud. I had brought a photo album. Not digital, actual photos, printed and tucked into sleeves. Some of Dad, in his Navy uniform. Some of us fishing on the river when I was 7. One of me in pigtails on his shoulders at the county fair. When I passed it around, Madison didn't even look up from her phone. Bradley flipped through it like it was junk mail. Aunt Sandra commented, "Wow, a lot of these are just you and your dad, huh? Not much of the rest of the family." That was the point. He was the family. The only one who saw me. The only one who never laughed when I cried. And the only one who would be missing when it mattered most. It was a Tuesday. Overcast, thick with humidity that made your skin feel heavy. I was on a Zoom call with a new client when I saw the missed call from Dad's neighbor, Frankie Dalton. He never called.
Ever.
I excused myself and called back immediately. Frankie didn't even wait for pleasantries. "Emily, it's your dad. The ambulance just left. He collapsed in the yard." I remember every sound in that moment. The way my phone slipped from my hand and hit the hardwood. The way the wind pushed against my office window, like it was trying to get in. The way my breath wouldn't come, like my lungs had forgotten their job. I made it to the hospital in 23 minutes. I remember because I ran 2 red lights and never looked at the speedometer once. The ER nurse led me to a small, cold room. She didn't have to say it. The look in her eyes told me everything. "We did everything we could," she said softly. I sat there, alone, on a plastic chair bolted to the floor, staring at a blank wall while the world shattered inside me. They let me see him.
He was so still.
I whispered. I kept my promise. I came. I kissed his forehead. It was still warm. An hour later, the family began to arrive. Madison walked in with sunglasses again, no tears, phone in hand. Bradley looked annoyed, like this was an inconvenience. Darlene hugged me with one arm, the other still gripping her Louis Vuitton bag. No one asked if I was okay. No one said they were sorry. They just started asking questions. Was there a DNR? Do you know which lawyer has the will? Did he talk to you about the house? The man was barely cold. They were already picking over him, like vultures. I tried to stay calm. I really did. I answered what I could, gave them the name of his attorney, Ronald Huxley. I said we could all meet together and go over it properly when we'd had time to breathe. Bradley smirked. If there even is a will. That night, I went back to Dad's house. I had the keys. He gave them to me a year ago, just in case. I sat in his recliner and cried until my throat hurt. His slippers were still by the fireplace. His reading glasses rested on top of the crossword puzzle he hadn't finished. I didn't sleep. The next morning, the family showed up. No warning. Madison walked in like she owned the place. She opened cabinets, started pointing. "I want the grandfather clock," she said to Darlene. "Dad promised it to me when I was in high school." Bradley started making a list of shared property that needed to be fairly distributed. I stood in the hallway and watched. And then, I snapped. "Get out," I said. Quiet at first.
Get out.
Madison laughed. "You don't get to tell us what to do, Emily. This is our father's house too." I stepped forward. My voice didn't shake.
No, Madison.
He was my father. You tolerated him. You barely visited. You rolled your eyes every time he talked about old music or fishing. You mocked his love for me. You made jokes while he was alive. You're not going to desecrate him now that he's gone. Darlene tried to intervene, but I turned to her too. You knew how they treated me. You let it happen. And now you're going to stand in his kitchen and pretend like you cared. Silence. That kind of silence that burns. I picked up the letter he had left me on his nightstand. I hadn't read it yet, but I held it like a sword. He trusted me. He prepared for this. You don't get to take his memory and twist it into something transactional. They left eventually, grumbling. Madison called me hysterical. Bradley mumbled something about contesting the will before we'd even read it. I held on to that letter for hours before I had the strength to open it. It was handwritten. My Emily, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I wish I had more time. I wish I could walk you down an aisle, hold your first baby, see your business bloom. But I need you to know, everything I built knowing you would carry it with love. I've made sure you're protected. Not because I owe you, because you loved me when I had nothing to give. That's the kind of love that deserves everything.
Dad.
I clutched it to my chest and sobbed. Not just for the man I lost, but for the world I was now alone in. And still, in my ears, I could hear them laughing. The day of the will reading was gray and tense. The kind of day where the sky looks like wet concrete and the air hangs too heavy in your lungs. I arrived early at Huxley and Graham, attorneys at law, a beige office suite on the 6th floor of a nondescript building in downtown Cedar Falls. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes, but I didn't drink it. My hands were too tight around the paper cup to raise it. One by one they arrived. Madison in a blazer too expensive for a town like ours. Bradley in sunglasses, indoors. Darlene in full widow mode, black dress, pearls, and a look that could cut glass.
We didn't speak.
Not until Ronald Huxley, Dad's longtime attorney, walked in with a leather-bound folder in his hands and a look that said he wasn't interested in family drama, but expected it anyway. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, "James Parker's will is clear, current, and legally binding. No ambiguities." Madison leaned back.
Great.
"Let's just get it over with." Bradley smirked. "I hope the house goes to Mom. She's the one who kept it in shape after all." Ronald opened the folder. Per Mr. Parker's will, dated 7 months prior to his death, the entire estate, including property, business interests, investment accounts, and personal assets, is left solely and exclusively to his daughter, Emily Parker. Silence. Then Darlene's breath hitched. I'm sorry, what?" He repeated it. Madison shot up from her chair. "You have got to be kidding me. That's not legal. There must be a mistake." Ronald shook his head. "No mistake." Mr. Parker was very deliberate. He even wrote a statement, which I'm instructed to read aloud. He flipped to the back of the document and began. "To those who feel surprised by this, I loved my wife and I cared for her children. But love and loyalty are not the same. Emily stood by me in sickness, in silence, in storms. She earned what she receives, not because she wanted my money, but because she never treated me like that's all I was." Bradley scoffed. He must have been manipulated. He wasn't well. He had memory lapses. Ronald raised his eyebrow. He completed a competency evaluation 3 weeks before finalizing this will. I have it on file. His mental faculties were clear and stable. Madison pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "This is disgusting, Emily.
You orchestrated this.
You always played the victim. Now you get the house, the money, everything? What about the rest of us?" And that's when I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked them in the eye and said, "I spent every weekend by his side. I cleaned up after his surgeries. I held his hand through panic attacks. You were in Cancun. You were on Instagram. You were talking behind his back while I was holding him up. So don't you dare act like I owe you anything." Darlene's voice cracked. "He was my husband." I nodded. "And you let your children mock his only daughter at his funeral." Ronald handed me a small envelope. "He also left this for you." Inside was a single silver key on a chain. The note was in his handwriting. "For the lake house. You always loved the water." I looked back up, my voice steady. "You didn't just lose an inheritance. You lost the privilege of pretending you cared." The room stayed quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then I walked out, and I didn't look back. Later that week, Bradley sent a text. "We should talk. Maybe work something out." I didn't reply. Madison posted some vague quote on Instagram about family betrayal and justice always finding its way. That part made me laugh, because justice had already come, and it had my name on it. After the reading of the will, I didn't go home. I couldn't. That house, the one my dad built brick by brick, felt like a lie now. Like every photo on the wall was smirking at me, every cushion still warm from my father's presence suddenly gone cold. Instead, I drove. For hours. I don't remember how far. I just remember pulling into a rest stop somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, parking under a busted streetlight, and screaming into the steering wheel until my throat was raw. Not crying. Screaming. My hands were shaking. My lips were numb. It was as if my whole body was rejecting what had just happened. How could they? Why would he let them do this? Was I just nothing to him? I tried to come up with reasons. Maybe he changed his mind in the final months. Maybe they pressured him. Maybe the cancer clouded his judgment. But the truth was, I didn't know. And not knowing was the worst part of it all. The next day, I checked into a cheap motel. It smelled like bleach and regret. I lay on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, hearing the muffled sounds of a couple fighting in the room next door. I hadn't eaten in nearly 30 hours. I opened my phone. 47 missed calls. Mostly from Madison and Uncle Keith. I played one voicemail. "Emily, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Let's be civil about the estate." We're family. Family? That word had been weaponized against me so many times, I no longer knew what it meant. The days blurred. I couldn't return to my teaching job just yet. How do you face a room full of second graders when your heart has been shattered by adults who should have known better? I walked a lot. Parks, empty libraries, riverside trails. I watched people laughing on benches, couples holding hands, teenagers sneaking out of gas stations with stolen candy. Life was still moving, uncaring of my pause. I'd always thought grief was just about missing someone. But this grief, it wasn't just about losing my dad. It was about losing my anchor, my identity, my entire understanding of what I meant to the people I called blood. And then came the whispers. My friend Tara called me one evening. Emily, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but Madison's been posting. Posting what? Screenshots. Snarky captions. Subtle digs. One photo of a martini glass with a caption. Some people cry, others sign checks. Another one of a designer purse tagged with, "Thanks, Dad." It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was mockery. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about power, position, and proving, in their twisted way, that I never really belonged. I wanted to call my dad. Just once. To ask him, why? Why did you let them do this? Why didn't you protect me? But there was no answer. Only silence. So, I did what broken people often do. I questioned everything about myself. Was I too emotional? Too distant? Did I somehow fail to be the daughter he wanted? I found myself revisiting every conversation we'd ever had. Every holiday. Every missed birthday call. But deep down, I knew the truth. I loved him. And he loved me. And something unnatural had happened in those final months. Something that twisted everything. One night, I dreamed of him. He was sitting in the old recliner, holding his coffee mug, staring out the window. I sat beside him. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and held my hand, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. I woke up sobbing. Not because it was sad, but because it reminded me that love doesn't vanish with betrayal. Love stays. And it whispers through dreams, through memories, through the silence. The turning point came the day I walked into a bookstore and saw a sign. Business Planning 101, free community workshop this Saturday. I almost walked past it, but something pulled me back. Maybe it was the voice of my dad, somewhere in my heart. Maybe it was my own refusal to stay broken. Either way, I went. I sat in the back, notebook in hand, surrounded by strangers, listening to a woman named Donna talk about LLCs, branding, and rebuilding your life from scratch. I didn't understand half of what she said, but I understood one thing. No one was coming to save me. I had to become the woman who saves herself. From that day on, I made a rule. One brave thing a day. Sometimes it was small, sending a cold email to a business consultant. Sometimes it was bigger, filing paperwork to register my own tutoring business. I used my teaching skills, created an online learning platform, started tutoring kids whose parents didn't trust the public school system anymore. It was hard, lonely,
Exhausting.
but for the first time in months, I felt alive. I stopped checking Madison's Instagram. I stopped listening to voicemails from Keith. I stopped crying over people who didn't lose sleep over me. I was done being the girl they laughed at. I was becoming the woman they'd never see coming. They say rock bottom teaches you lessons that mountaintops never will. And maybe that's true. Because when the dust finally settled, when the lawyer calls stopped, the pitiful looks faded, and the money dried up, I wasn't just broke financially. I was hollow. I had no home, no job, and not a single family member who would so much as answer my calls. I remember sitting on the curb outside a closed-down dry cleaner, clutching a half-eaten granola bar and my father's old notebook. It was frayed, smelled like old cologne and paper, but it was filled with ideas. Business notes, doodles, quotes like, "Don't just survive, calculate." And for the first time in weeks, I whispered to myself, "Okay, Dad, let's calculate." I started with the public library because it had free Wi-Fi and warmth. I applied for every job I could. Retail, food service, admin assistant. I even considered working in the very pharmacy where Madison's husband was district manager. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not like that. Instead, I took the graveyard shift cleaning a strip mall that reeked of fried chicken and regret. It was humiliating, but it paid. Barely. Enough to get me into a tiny room in a women's boarding house across town.
The ceiling leaked.
The faucet sputtered. My roommate was a 65-year-old recovering blackjack dealer named Patty who snored like a dying walrus. But it was mine. I was safe. I was breathing again. I taped a picture of my dad to the wall next to my mattress. Day 1. I wrote beneath it. Every day after my shift, I'd go back to the library and study small business management, marketing, even accounting. YouTube videos.
Free courses. Anything.
I also looked through my dad's notebook. That man had ideas for days. He once wrote, "The best revenge isn't flashy. It's when they walk into your office and don't recognize the girl they threw away." That line hit me hard.
So, I saved.
Every tip. Every spare dime. I stopped drinking coffee and started drinking boiled water with lemon. My splurge was $1 notebooks from the dollar store. I built a business plan. The idea was simple and eco-conscious, woman-led deep cleaning service. But not just for homes. For small businesses that couldn't afford corporate cleaners. I called it Good Grit Cleaning Company. Tagline? We don't just clean, we rebuild. I made a free logo using a Canva tutorial, printed flyers at the library, and spent weekends handing them out at local strip malls, churches, and nail salons. Most people ignored me. Some laughed. One woman at a bakery asked, "How can I trust someone who looks this desperate?" I wanted to cry. But instead I said, because no one scrubs like someone trying to earn their second chance. And that got me my first contract. $150 a week. Just enough to buy gloves, more flyers, and a secondhand vacuum. Week by week, the contracts grew. I cleaned 7 days a week, often 16 hours a day. My hands bled. My back screamed. I didn't go on dates. I didn't watch movies. But I was rebuilding brick by brick. By month 6, I hired my first 2 employees, another woman from the boarding house named Candace, and a recent parolee named Josie, who cried the first time she held a steady paycheck. Together, we cleaned gyms, barbershops, churches, even a small dentist's office that paid on time and gave us free floss. I reinvested every dollar. I took the bus, ate instant rice, said no to everything except my dream. One day, I walked into a bank to open a business account. The manager, Mark, was skeptical. "What assets do you have, Miss?" "Amanda Callahan." I replied, firmly. "Any collateral?" I slid over a manila folder, my cleaned contracts, invoices, and 5 handwritten testimonials from small businesses. He reviewed them.
Slowly.
"You built this in under a year?" I nodded. He blinked, then smiled. "Well, Ms. Callahan, it's a pleasure to open your first business account." That folder felt heavier than gold. It was a tiny unit, barely bigger than a shed, on the edge of a strip mall with chipped brick and a faulty AC. But it had a sign. Good Grit Cleaning Company. I stood outside in the summer heat, watching the letters go up, and cried for the first time in months. Not because I was hurt, but because I was healing. Patty came by with a bag of day-old bagels to celebrate. Josie brought soda. We sat on the dusty office floor and toasted with plastic cups like royalty. By year 2, I had 12 employees, 38 clients, and a part-time office manager named Brooke who once managed a grocery store. People started referring me to bigger contracts, event venues, hotels, even local government buildings. I wore black slacks, carried an iPad, and introduced myself as founder and CEO. But inside, I still carried the voice of my cousin Trisha saying, "She's crying for the money." So I built quietly. No flashy social media. No family updates. Just grit, grace, and growth. One afternoon, while I was reviewing payroll, Brooke knocked on the door. "You might want to look at this," she said, handing me a local paper. Headline: Madison Callahan under investigation for financial mismanagement of father's trust fund. Below it, a photo of my sister, looking pale, clutching her purse like it was oxygen. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach turned, not with joy, not with vengeance, just validation. You'd think I'd celebrate. I didn't. Instead, I walked down the hall of my now fully renovated office, stopped at the framed photo of my father, same one from my boarding house wall, and whispered, "You were right, Dad. We calculated." I was no longer the girl who cried at funerals and got mocked for it. I was the woman who turned ashes into income, who cleaned bathrooms until her business gleamed, who hired women like her and paid them better than minimum wage. I was power, wrapped in quiet, the kind that doesn't need revenge. But it was about time they saw me. When my calendar pinged with a reminder, boardroom vote, 3 p.m., I didn't hesitate. I straightened my blazer, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and walked out the door like a woman who had nothing to prove but everything to gain. I had spent the last 3 years restructuring our family's struggling manufacturing company into a lean, agile logistics and freight operation. I bought it through an LLC that none of them knew I owned, Oak Ridge Vantage Holdings, a name that meant absolutely nothing to them, but everything to me. It was my father's middle name and my childhood street. The company they laughed at me for loving now belonged to me. I entered the glass-paneled conference room downtown, where Madison, Uncle Keith, Trisha, and a few remaining board members were already seated. They'd called this emergency meeting thinking they were about to save the company from collapse. They didn't realize the company had already been saved, just not by them. "We're going to vote on the proposal to sell the remaining assets to Sirline Logistics," Uncle Keith announced. "It's the only way to salvage anything of value." I took the open chair across from him. I didn't say anything at first. I just opened my laptop and clicked a single button. A video began to play on the large screen. It was a pre-recorded message from the CEO of Sirline. "We've withdrawn our offer. We learned that Oak Ridge Vantage Holdings already acquired controlling interest in Ridgeworks Freight. We believe their leadership is better aligned with the future of American logistics." The silence that followed was cinematic. Madison blinked. "Wait, what? That can't be right. Who is Oak Ridge?" I smiled. "That would be me." You could have heard a pin drop on a shag rug. Trisha laughed nervously. "You? You're Oak Ridge?" "Yes," I said calmly. "For the last 18 months. Every plan you rejected, every meeting you skipped, every silly idea you ridiculed, I implemented anyway. And guess what? It worked." Keith turned red. "That's not legal. You deceived the board." "No," I replied. "I outmaneuvered a bunch of arrogant fools who thought they could run a business off their last names." Madison stood, her hands shaking. "Your sister." I stood too. I was. "The day you mocked me at Dad's funeral? That ended everything." I took out a small manila envelope and slid it across the table. "What's this?" "Your severance package." "You're firing us?" "No," I said. "I'm liberating the company." Uncle Keith snatched the envelope and skimmed through the documents. "You think you're clever? You'll run this place into the ground. We've doubled revenue in 2 years." I looked him straight in the eye. "While you were golfing." Trisha muttered, "You've changed." I smiled again, but there was steel in it. Grief changes people. So does betrayal. You know what else changes people? Success. I walked to the door, but turned back just once. "By the way," I added, "Dad knew. I told him about the Oak Ridge plan before he passed. He said he hoped you'd someday see who I really was." Madison's lip trembled, and I left them there, silent, powerless, and small. A week later, I received a voice message from Madison. Her tone was subdued. "I don't know how to fix what I broke, Natalie. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say you deserved better from all of us. And I hope you find peace in what you've built. You earned it." I didn't respond. Some apologies aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be released into the air, like smoke from a fire you've already walked away from. That night, I stood by the fireplace in the house I bought with my own money. I took out an old photo, me and Dad, on his boat, laughing like we had no idea how complicated life would become. I whispered, "We did it. And this time my tears came softly. Not from grief, but from power reclaimed. From justice lived. From knowing the people who once laughed at my tears were now drowning in their own regrets. Bankrupt not just in dollars, but in dignity. I never imagined that peace would feel so quiet. Not triumphant. Not loud. Not even proud. Just quiet. It's funny how all those years I spent aching to be understood, to be seen, to be treated with love and fairness, I thought that healing would come from finally being heard. But instead, healing came the moment I realized I didn't need to be. The day the auction closed on the last property my uncle once owned, I stood in the same spot he used to look down on me from. Same oak-paneled conference room. Same leather chair. Only this time, I was the one signing papers. Not out of revenge. Not even out of victory. Out of closure. And as the pen touched the page, something inside me released. Not a scream. Not a cheer. Just a deep exhale. A letting go. I didn't call Madison. I didn't text Trisha. I didn't gloat. Because their punishment had already arrived, not in the form of my success, but in the reality that they were still the same. Still bitter. Still scared. Still trapped in the same mindset that kept them broken and blaming others for their brokenness. I had outgrown them. There's a kind of sadness in that realization, but there's also peace. Growth costs you people. It costs you old versions of yourself, too. And that's okay. I walk differently now. I hold my head differently. I no longer cry in front of people who've earned my silence. But I do cry. I cry in joy, in relief, in awe of the fact that I made it out of the story they tried to trap me in. And I rewrote the ending. Not as a victim. Not even as a hero.
Just as me.
A woman who was laughed at for feeling deeply and now lives deeply. A woman who was mocked for breaking down and now builds things others said were impossible. A woman who once begged for a seat at their table and then realized she was born to build her own. So, if you're listening right now and you've ever been laughed at, especially when you were vulnerable, this part is for you. Don't waste your pain trying to prove yourself to people who gain power by underestimating you. Don't shapeshift to fit their expectations. Don't hide your heart just because they called it too much. Because one day, they'll look up and you'll be standing in a place they can't reach. And you won't even feel the need to wave. You'll be too focused on who you've become. I don't need their apologies. I don't even need their regret. Because my tears watered the soil of a life they never believed I could build. And now I'm blooming, quietly, powerfully, and on my own damn terms.